If you want to finally finish more and better music, then this video right here is for you, because I'm going to share with you my 2 favorite ways to break out of the loop fast. And don't worry, they're both super effective, but also very simple and also easy to implement. And especially the second one is something that I haven't seen anyone else share on YouTube yet, so make sure to watch this till the end. Now, if you don't know me yet, I'm Philip from Pick Yourself. I produce, mix and master music professionally for over 15 years. I'm also a coach and mentor to artists like you, helping them with finishing songs and getting better and making progress with their music. So if that's interesting to you, check out pickyourself.com/coaching. My team and I would love to help you. Now let's get into the video. So what we have here so far is 3 tracks, kick and 2 different types of percussion. It sounds like this. So nice and groovy, sounds great so far, but the problem is that this really easily falls into this loop trap where you keep on working and refining that loop, making it sound better, adding layers after layers, but essentially the loop doesn't lead anywhere. And we're now going to solve that and create interest within that loop with just one really simple hack that I'm going to show you now. Now, there's one key difference you need to understand between amateurish sounding demos and professional sounding tracks. And that difference is not the quality of the mixing necessarily, even though you at the end might perceive it as like that's the thing that makes it different. In reality, they're doing things differently from the get-go. So already in this early loop stage, they are doing things that later on influence the mixing, the arrangement, and so on in a very positive way. And one of the things is what I'm going to show you now. It has to do with the what I call micro-modulations in the sound. So if you modulate too much, it obviously leads into the wrong direction. So I'm going to check this out. Like, this is the first loop here. Now this already has like a little bit of built-in different tonality of the sounds. It has like really nice depth already. And if I mess with this too much, it's probably start to sound crazy. But listen to the second one. It's an interesting loop. It creates depth. It has like an element of spaciousness to it. I would love to work with that. But overall, this is an element where we can try out these micro-modulations to make it sound even more interesting and push the track forward. So what I'll do is I'll grab a pitch shifting plugin. And now there's a couple of things you can do. You can obviously tweak this and use a built-in delay. If your DAW doesn't have that, you can obviously just use a delay that then leads into some kind of pitch shifting plugin. But I'm going to do it with the native thing here. Set the dotted 8s. Then experiment with the pitch shifting and just see like, okay, where does it sound interesting to me in a way that I would develop this? And wait a second, I'm going to make sense of this right now. And once I have like an idea of the range that I want to modulate this in, this is where it gets interesting, because now we're actually going to modulate this across the track that we're working on. So let's find our friend, the Ableton LFO tool. And with this loaded in, we can map it to, for example, this chorus tuning. So as you can see, the LFO is now modulating quite heavily. We're going to reduce the depth of the modulation so that it's just like pitching up and down a little bit. And I'm going to bring the rate down so that it's slowly evolving. I recommend you don't use like a fixed note value to this, because you want that modulation to be a little bit random. Yeah, actually with my modular system that you can see in the background, I very often use LFOs that are not synced to drive some modulations. There's like a really cool tool called Oct, which has a lot of different LFOs that are kind of in sync with one another or like musically tuned, and you can speed them all up at the same time or slow all of them down. But the goal of this is to infuse some organic motion into the sound, and that's exactly what we're going to mimic here as well. And then obviously you need to fine tune the depth and the speed of the modulation. So I'm going to use a bit more depth of the modulation. So it's modulating more, like tuning the sound down, tuning it up again, but I'm going to reduce the speed even more. And if the result for you is a tiny bit too extreme, then you can obviously work with the wet dry and just add in a little bit of that modulation, which is actually a good idea in this sound. Let's try it out. Now Now, why do we even do this? Why do we care about this? Why does this help us finish songs? I've seen a video, an interview with Ricardo Villalobos many years ago. And in this video, he described his process of developing tracks. And while he's like a minimal producer, and obviously you don't need that much development over a track in these types of genres like minimal techno, he was very, very adamant about one thing. And that was, in the studio, he wants to create a loop that he could basically listen to forever. Yeah, so he could jam out on that loop and listen to it without getting bored for hours. And I think that's the goal here. Now, he obviously works with a lot of external gear, modular synths and so on, but the tools themselves, they don't really matter for this process. You can still mimic the same mindset and the mental model behind it and use it in your productions. So I think the more you can do to keep your loop interesting so that it develops on its own without adding too many layers to it, this is where the secret sauce lies. Now, a lot of producers, when they learn about this concept of micro-modulations, they very often stick to simple things like modulating the percussions a little bit like I've just shown you. But actually, you're missing out on a lot of potential, because what you should be doing instead is also treating something like your bass lines, your pads, your lead sounds in this way to keep it interesting and to create that organic texture. Now, let me show you what I mean with the example of a bass sound. So here we have a bass track, and I've put a filter and a saturator on those. We use an LFO, and we map this now in a very clever way to both these parameters. First of all, we're going to map it into the filter. As you can see, it's moving the filter frequency, maybe change the depth a little bit. And now the interesting thing is we're going to map this slightly differently to the saturator as well. And so you can hear that it's pushing into the saturator really, really hard when the filter opens up. And I needed to really fine tune this. So I'm going to push it even harder into the drive here. The reason I'm controlling this separately is because I want to know exactly how far I can push this. And you also have to make up for the change of lawless, which means you also map the same LFO to the outputs of the saturator. But here you have to make sure that it's actually modulating into the different direction. The more you push into the saturator, the louder will get, and so the more you have to take away from the output, and the other way around, of course. So if it's like super quiet and low, you want the output to be a little bit louder. So this is why you need to do a bit of fine-tuning, but you can get super good results with that. And once again, you can always do this like in a wet, dry fashion if you want the results to be like a bit more tamed. But I think this is something where you can also get bold. A good opportunity is also to create, for example, two different basslines where one of them provides the stability, and then you create a second one, maybe just using the overtones of the bass. So you separate them off, you split the frequency in two different sections, and you just modulate the higher notes or the higher frequencies basically of that bass. And this way you get a really nice blend. So the trick I've just shown you here will help you develop better starting points for your tracks, because the loop already sounds more evolving, like it's developing into something. But the second technique that I'm about to show you now is going to take this concept and apply it at a very different level, talking about the different sections of the song. Before we get into this, if you want to finish more music and be really proud of what you actually put out, I have a free gift for you. It's called the Finisher Framework. It's my 3 simple steps to finish at least one great sounding song per month. This is the exact system that we're also teaching our people in the coaching program. So if that sounds interesting to you, go to pickyourself.com/framework. It's completely free. Hope you enjoy it. So very often when we think about arrangements, we think about we have to develop all these different parts, and very often we're overcomplicating it, because essentially in dance music, especially in genres like techno, very often the different parts are just evolutions of one original loop. Now, there is a way to do this really bad, where it's sounding just boring and too hypnotic, not hypnotic in a good way. And there's another way of doing this cleverly, and I call this approach intensity levels. Now, with intensity levels, I just mean you create variations of your original part without even knowing like where this is going to go in the song later on, because that's overwhelming. If you try to map out the entire song, it probably adds to the confusion you already have. So what I suggest is when you're in this loop stage and it sounds like something's coming together, try to create different variations of that loop with different intensity levels that you can then distribute throughout the song to map out at least the most important parts. So what I've done here is I've mapped out a progression in terms of the intensity of things that get added to this. So we start with the basic loop that we've had, like this. Then we have the part where the hi-hat comes in. We have then a lead line on top. And then lastly, we have the cymbal on top as well. And by the way, don't worry, the cymbal is going to sound fantastic in the end. This is intentional. You can see that I've always duplicated these parts twice. And this is because what we're going to do is we're going to add different intensity layers to the second half. So we have basically a toned down version of this part and then an elevated version of this part. We have a toned down version of this part and an elevated version of this part, and so on and so forth, until we land at the absolute highest intensity possible here at this part. And so all you need to do to create these different intensity levels between this part where the same stuff is playing is you pick one or several parameters that you automate from lower intensity to higher intensity. So let me show you what I do here. So in its simplest form, we could just use a filter, for example, on this sound and open it up throughout this development. Then you map out a different version in the next part. You can either directly do a smooth transition if you're already working on the connection of the parts, or you can just basically use this as a template and see like, okay, this is how it would sound with the filter opened up. Now, the next part is where this hi-hat opens up. And the cool thing is you can directly change the sound of the hi-hat as well. So we could use this as a starting point. I have used just this DS hi-hat, which is Ableton's internal drum synth, and it actually sounds quite good. I'm very happy with that. And you could change the pitch, for example, change the decay. So all these types of things can make sense for a track. So let's play and basically modulate at the same time and then try out what works. So let's maybe say we want to open up the hi-hat here. This can be a really cool avenue. We'll just open this up here, have one part where it's like a little bit more close to hi-hat. One version where it's like opened up. And yeah, this is how you develop the hi-hat. And for the next part, for the lead, you can do even more. I'm going to show you one of my favorite tricks here. And just so you understand this correctly, we have those two different intensity levels of the hi-hat. It doesn't necessarily mean we have to also use the higher intensity when more parts come in. We could also just take this one, for example, get rid of this one and use the lower intensity level again. And then for the higher intensity level, you might want to have the hi-hat like this and then also change something about the lead sound. With lead sounds, I personally always like to modulate something in the original synthesizer if you've created the synth patch yourself. If you're working with a loop, you can also manipulate the audio warping, for example. This can be really cool. But here we're using drift, and drift has a lot of parameters worth automating. So for example, the shape here. Now, obviously, this is amazing for adding intensity to a sound, and you don't always have to just use two static settings, one low, one high. You can also paint in an automation curve that you will later on use. So we'll go from 0 here to something like a little bit higher there. So let's check this out. Now you can pair this with a lot of other cool settings. I'm going to explore a couple of my favorites and then we'll see. A cool way to ramp up the intensity is, for example, to add a little bit of noise into the signal. So we already have a bit of noise in that synthesizer, but we can ramp this up. So we select it here, bring the intensity up here a bit. What you can do at the same time is, for example, change the release time of the sounds or of how the filters are opening here. Oh, this is actually a natural transition to the part with the cymbals, which is quite nice. With the cymbal, what I don't like currently is that it still sounds very static. So all the cymbal hits are exactly the same, and I want them to sound like washed out and deep and immersive. And let me show you a little bit of some trickery that you can use in here. So first thing I will do is add a little bit of an auto pan so that the cymbal is kind of wandering a little bit between left and right. And you only want a touch of that, because if it's getting too much, then it just starts to sound very weird. Now, the second thing we want is we want a little bit of life with the decay time so that it somehow starts to wash out a bit more. So this is the next thing, and that's actually one of the parameters that I would like to automate with that. Actually, I want the decay to ramp up already in this part so that I can show you more in the next one. This is doing its thing. It's getting more intense and more intense and more intense. And actually in the second part where the intensity is the highest, I'll show you another trick, which is using the echo. We will ramp up the feedback here quite a bit. I will unsync this and just use the echo time. So as you can hear, like the intensity is getting more and more. Spice this out and see how that sounds. This is where it gets dangerous. This is where you need to be really careful with how you modulate this. But this feedback sound is actually something that can propel the track into a new level of intensity, which is a very, very cool trick. And I like to do this with synths. I like to do this with percussion sounds. It's actually quite a cool little trick. What makes it special is you have to go to a little bit higher than 100%. Yeah. Then you bring it back down again. Now, what I want you to take away from all of this is, first of all, your original loop needs more of this micro-modulation from the get-go to stay interesting, to pull you in without you feeling like you need to add more and more layers to your track to just make it sound more interesting. And the second thing is you can then use these intensity layers, like I've shown you right here, to map out the arrangement of your track. So this here is just an example chronologically going from a little bit more shallow to something more dense. But what you can actually do is you can rip the track apart and use these different intensity layers, distribute them across your arrangement, maybe in some parts delete much more and compose new things. In other parts, you put in even more elements there. And this will give you like a really good starting point for your arrangements to play with this like suspension and this like tension and release. And as you can see, we have only kick, bass, a couple of percussions, and one lead sound. So this is not a lot of stuff, but it already sounds quite immersive. So I hope you got a lot out of this. And if you want to learn more about arrangement, check out this video right here.